Thank you very much. I will start the presentation and I will also have a look at the clock, but I do not intend to use all the 20 minutes, I hope. But the danger, of course, is if you are too deep in a topic that you like, you start talking a lot about it. So I will try to be very strict. First of all, thank you very much for being here and the support in any form that was received. So I'm going to introduce my thesis here, and I will just focus on the main aspects. The thesis dealt with religious intercultural management in the 16th and 17th centuries, in particular in Japan and Peru, where the Jesuits had established order provinces in that time. And I was particularly interested in the value of human capital and the global mindset for their intercultural management. The Jesuit order was chosen, or a historical study was chosen in the first place, because the categories of culture are more strict, or let's say the differences between the cultures in that study are more strict than they would be today. There has been a lot of management studies in history as well. Yet I checked some of the leading journals like Management History. Intercultural management was obviously not really en vogue so far. In management studies, there are historical studies sometimes, but they are also more exotic, I would say. But I try to formulate results that are of value for modern day companies, in particular, expanding or globalizing small and medium-sized enterprises. So when we talk about the Jesuit order, we have to understand that as an international franchise. That means an order province was established, but this province needed to be self-sufficient, independent in a way, although they had to send regular reports to Europe, which they did, sometimes on different routes. So the same report would arrive in Europe from time to time, which gives us a good possibility to document the endeavors in the time set. The order was founded by Ignatius of Loyola, the Jesuit. There are a lot of Jesuit colleges named after him today, especially in the United States. And he was some kind of a character that had a change of life in his later years and decided to live a more spiritual life in the service of God. And he gathered his study buddies, one would say. He knew from his educational years, and the order was eventually officially acknowledged by Pope Paul III in 1540, although some of the structures had been established in the 1530s already. The local branches were supposed to fulfill some kind of missionary work, but the internationalization and also the fact that they also had an economic aspect to that kind of work makes them comparable to modern small and medium-sized enterprises. So that was the frame I applied to the Jesuit order provinces here. So the provinces were treated individually or singularly as internationalizing, globalizing, or even born global small and medium-sized enterprises. That means they expanded not geographically from Europe to the neighboring countries, but they jumped right into the middle and were born global from the beginning. And it was for the Jesuits also a precondition everyone had to agree upon, that they would be sent abroad. Abroad in this case means Peru, not in the modern state Peru sense, but the Jesuit order province of Peru that was later divided as well into different provinces, most prominently the Jesuit state, it is usually referred to, of Paraguay. And in the case of Japan, we have Jesuit activities mostly on the southern island Kyushu, which was the point of entry, so to speak, for foreigners that reached Japan in the 16th century. So those provinces have been chosen because they are equally far away from Europe. They are culturally different. They have some kind of differences with regard to the external factors that also needed to be considered for the project, but they are not chosen in any sense to prove, for example, the Uppsala model that companies expand in a culturally closer environment first. Here, it was really chosen to have two culturally different cases and to see how the Jesuits acted there. So their first and foremost aim was to spread Christianity, of course, as a missionary order, but they had to act like a modern day small and medium-sized enterprise in the sense that they also had to secure their economic survival. So they were forced by the franchise system of the Jesuits, so to speak, to be managers not only in the sense of religious managers. They were also economic managers. Very often, their process was related to do-it-yourself and learning by doing experiences. And as will be shown, the global mindset of the leading managers was important for proper decisions made in that new cultural environment. So the main aspects of the thesis are clear. Which impact did human capital and the global mindset have for the success of Jesuit missionary work in those two provinces in said centuries? Human capital is here first and foremost understood in relation to language skills. That is simply related to the fact that the sources needed to provide information that could be used as a category of proof for existence or non-existence of human capital. And the global mindset, which is based on a previous experience in a non-European environment. So if the Jesuits, for example, had served in India before, it is assumed that they have at least an intercultural experience before they reach Japan. For the Peruvian case, they could have served somewhere else in the Caribbean before, and then Peru would have been the second or third station in their career. The method is based on a comparative historical longitudinal case study, which uses qualitative data for the Jesuits that are more well known, so the upper rank leadership, but also quantitative data in the sense, or let's say quantitative in brackets, because there are hundreds of data sets that had been evaluated for more than 200 individuals. That means for some individuals, there were multiple data sets that also showed some kind of progress with regard to language capacity, for example. So if they serve a long time in the respective environment, we see some kind of development. The research fields of interest are studies related to successful performance and internationalization of small and medium-sized enterprises in general. There are studies that consider the role of language or education in general as an element for a successful intercultural management. Some form of intercultural intelligence is established due this learning process. And there are also studies that highlight the role of a global mindset for the successful internationalization. That means if the managerial level of the people involved has a global mindset or shows a global mindset, there are better chances for internationalization. So the research operationalization for the project was a deductive research design where theoretical works in the fields of interest had been looked at. Then the data analysis for two cases has been done and compared so that it allows to say, for example, what is more important, human capital or global mindset? But it also allows to give management recommendations for present-day SMEs. The two categories were checked for all available missionaries. There were a handful of cases where no data was available because the reports did not mention the people. in their various capacity. They were just mentioned as somebody who served in a specific province, but no personal portfolio, so to speak, was provided. So the missionary work based on those existent factors has been taken into consideration, but it has also been checked against external factors that, as I will show you in a few minutes, play an important role as well. The data sets followed this kind of structure. We had the name, the country of origin, the time the person spent in Japan or Peru, if they had language skills. Here, there were also people with language skills that were considered mediocre, so they have not been included as Japanese speaking or speaking an indigenous language in Peru. The previous assignments and reports gave some idea about a global mindset and the successful missionary work. Here, the easily categorized as were they successful in converting people towards Christianity. If the people understood that as a European interpretation of Christianity must stay out of the question because the people that were converted left no sources. So they might have been converted for the Jesuits while the converts themselves did not feel very Christian, but that is just the silence of the sources that should also not be over-interpretized here. The data was mostly taken from Jesuit source compendiums, the Monumenta Historica Japoniae and the Monumenta Peruana, but in the case of more well-known Jesuits, other sources could be added here. What we see is that the Jesuits, the number of Jesuits, and here I focus on the fathers as the upper management in contrast to the brothers who were aspirants for those positions. The number increases, and in Japan, in contrast to Peru, the number of Jesuits that are able to speak Japanese also increases, but this increase is particularly related to the necessity. In contrast to Peru, where we have a divided society, where Spanish is also a language that can be used to serve the colonial communities. In Japan, it is simply necessary that the Japanese study Japan, that the Jesuits study Japanese to be able to do their missionary work. So we already see a different kind of pressure situation here, but we see that the number of people who speak the respective languages is increasing in both cases, although not as much in Peru as it is in Japan. So if we take a look at the numbers, we see that the numbers in Japan increase continuously, while in the Peruvian case, we have a peak in the consolidation period. With regard to the number and percentage of the people that are able to speak the language, we see an increase in both cases, although the increase is much higher in the Japanese case. As said, this is also related to the specific context that they had to. When it comes to conflicts with local authorities, both Jesuit provinces had to face conflicts during the entry period, which is not uncommon because there are competitors in that region. Although in Japan, there are Buddhists that are the competitors, while in the Peruvian case, the main competitors are the local authorities and other orders that are active there as well. The conflicts decreased during the consolidation period, but it also shows that if there are major conflicts, or let's say the potential for conflicts, it is rather related to a lack of a global mindset than to the lack of language capacities, because the most prominent case, Alessandro Valignano, didn't speak Japanese, but was globally minded enough to understand that he needs translators when he talks with people in power. And he also was very flexible in addressing the necessities of the local population. And he also forced the Jesuits to study Japanese. This increase of language capacities in the end, however, does not help to overcome the external threat for the existence of the Jesuit province in Japan. So in the end, we see in Japan that the language capacity is there. The global mindset obviously is also there in the leading ranks, but the external factor is no longer supporting the existence of the Jesuits. While in Peru, we do not have a conflict with local authorities, but more of a conflict within the Jesuit order about the role of language and the purpose of missionary work. So we see here some relations that are important. It is important during the consolidation period for a successful missionary work to have language skills. In the beginning, there are too few Jesuits to really cover that, and also considering that they used translators in the first period and relied on their own personnel, and later shows that there was some openness for the acceptance that they needed intermediaries. What is interesting in particular is the lack of the indigenous factor within the management. That means we have increasing numbers of Jesuit fathers, but the locals are not allowed to enter the Jesuit order in the higher ranks. That means there is a clear division between the foreign missionary leaders and the brothers where local people or indigenous people are accepted, but in a way exploited. So they are used as translators, but they are not given the opportunity to rise to real ranks within the structure, which makes the conflict in the end also inevitable, because the Jesuits are considered foreign, especially in Japan. All those findings give some possibilities for management recommendations. So first, it is important to have a context-related language education for the management, ideally before they enter the new market, so before the entry period, although during the entry period, the use of local intermediaries will help as well. But if they are not really available, it is definitely recommended to have at least a basic capacity for the language, also to understand the general attitude of the market towards the new competitor. It is far more important, I think, to secure managerial staff that is most likely to act according to a global mindset. So if you don't speak the language but have a global mindset, you can still avoid the conflict. If you have the language capacity but not the global mindset, you will, even if you speak the language, run into conflicts with local authorities. And the cases are there in both directions. It is also important to have a clear description of the task and to outline the hierarchies, which is problematic in the Jesuit case here, that they sometimes struggle about who is right about the future course of the organization. And those internal struggles, as has been shown with the case of Peru, make it inefficient to reach the original goal. It is also important to encourage the management in a culturally different space to include indigenous personnel and to give them the possibility to advance within the organization, because that will increase the trust in the organization as something that is reciprocal, in the sense that people gain from its existence. And eventually, one cannot leave out the external factor. That means the local political developments need to be proactively supervised, surveilled, reported, to make sure that there are ties to the political leadership as well, that that provide the political leadership with an argument on behalf of the new company that fulfills or tries to enter and develop in that market situation. There are some references here, and that's it from my side. And I think 19 minutes. Thanks a lot.